Hello friends, and welcome back to the house at Longmeadow. Today I'm standing in the footprint of what used to be our greenhouse. When we started our no-till garden 4 years ago, one of the first things we did was purchase and install a 6x10 greenhouse. And as you can see, it's no longer standing. We had a really nasty storm come through back in June, and unfortunately, the high winds and weather took out our greenhouse. This year, we do not have a greenhouse to start our seedlings. So, I'm here today to show you 3 ways you can start seedlings without a greenhouse. Here we go. So method number 1 for starting seeds without a greenhouse would be a cold frame. Today, I've just screwed together some scrap lumber that we have, and I'm going to top it with an old window that we have laying around. This is a great way to use the space that you already have. We already have garden beds, we already have amended soil in these beds, and so I don't need flats and trays and seed starting mix and all the other supplies that go along with starting seeds indoors or in a greenhouse. You can start pretty much anything in a cold frame except your warm season vegetables. Things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. Those are not going to germinate well here in the cold frame. This is unheated, and so at night the temperatures are going to get cold. So today I'm going to be starting some cold season vegetables in my cold frame. I'm going to start some broccoli, some cauliflower, and a couple varieties of market cabbages that we grow each year. I'm also going to grow parsley. Now, how do you prep this cold frame for seeds? Really, there's not a lot of prep work. You can sow the seeds just as you typically would. Follow the directions on the back of the seed packet. Now, one thing that you want to consider is, especially if you live in areas like we do here in East Texas, where the winter temperatures can fluctuate. One day we might have a high of 45, and then the next week we may have highs in the 70s. What can happen is, once your seedlings get up and get going, if we don't come out and vent this cold frame during warmer days to allow some cool air in, we could burn up the seedlings. Another benefit to starting seeds in a cold frame is that we don't need to harden off those plants once it's time to transplant them out into the garden. So what hardening off means is, if I start my seeds in a greenhouse, the seedlings are used to really warm temperatures. And so if we take those out and we transplant them directly into the garden without giving them an adjustment period to cool night temperatures, we can shock those plants, cause them to just have some trouble getting started out in our garden beds. So the nice thing about this is our plants are already pretty well adjusted to the nighttime temperatures in this unheated cold frame. The hardening off process is done for us. Another benefit of starting seeds here in this cold frame is that it's much easier to maintain moisture in a cold frame. These seedlings are connected to the ground, they're connected to the earth, and so it's much harder for the soil to dry out. In flats and trays, they can dry out really quickly, and so sometimes you need to water once or twice a day to ensure that your seedlings do not dry out. With the cold frame, that eliminates that step for us. Okay, this next method that I'm going to introduce you to is a new method for me and one I have never tried before. But Sometimes gardening is about experimenting, and so that is what we're going to do this season. So this method of seed starting is called the winter sowing method. So what we're doing is we're mimicking Mother Nature. So seeds that drop in the summer or fall would fall to the ground, and they would stay on the ground all through winter. They would be exposed to cold nights, winter weather, and those seeds would then come up next year in the spring or summer. We're doing the same thing here, although we're going to give those seeds some protection from the elements. We're creating almost like its own little mini greenhouse to help with germination, but otherwise these seeds will just sit outside in the cold without much care. What seeds would you want to start with a method like this? You want to look on your seed packet for seeds that are cool season vegetables. So things like broccoli, cauliflower, your cabbages, your brassicas. You can also look for words on the back of your seed packet that might say frost tolerant or cool season vegetables, frost hardy, winter hardy vegetables. Anything like that on the back of your seed packet will let you know that those type of seeds will start just fine with the winter sowing method. Other words that you might want to look for are cold stratifying or stratification. So cold stratifying is going to be where that seed needs a specific amount of cold time in order for it to germinate. A lot of seed packet will recommend that you place your seed packet in the freezer for 4 to 6 or even 8 weeks before you start those seeds indoors. So seeds like that require stratification will do great with this method. So a seed like that for me is going to be bergamot or bee balm. So I'm going to start that. I've also got some cool season flowers like a sweet pea. I'm going to start lavender. So lavender is one of my seed packets that recommends that you cold stratify for 4 weeks. I'm also going to start some herbs like thyme and oregano and marjoram. Those all can be started really early. And then lastly, I'm going to start some leeks. Your alliums like leeks, garlic, onions, shallots, chives, those things are pretty frost hardy. They like the cool weather, and so these will do great, I think, with this winter sowing method. One of the things that drew me to this method is you don't need to take up a lot of indoor space to start seeds. We live in a little small shop apartment, and there are 5 people and a dog, so there's just not a lot of room to set up large seed starting racks. Now, we are going to start some seeds that way. Our warm season vegetables like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, even squashes, will get started indoors, and I'll show you that here in just a little bit. But I just don't have the space to start all of the seeds for our garden that need to be started. So I'm going to label these seeds inside the container with a label, as well as marking on the outside of the container so I know what's in there. The reason you want to label on the interior as well is sometimes with the sun or the weather, since these are going to be exposed, your marker might wear off and then you won't know what the heck you planted in these containers. So just like our cold frame option, these seeds are going to be exposed to the elements, so to speak, so they're not going to require that hardening off period that you would need for seeds started indoors. Now, I am starting a couple of different varieties of seeds in a few of these containers. Like I have a mini broccoli and I have a standard size broccoli. So all I'm doing is using like a little wooden popsicle stick, and I'm just going to kind of stick that in the soil between the 2 varieties. That way I know which plants are which when they pop up. All right, the last thing that we're gonna do is to get these nice and watered in, and then we're gonna close our containers up using some duct tape. A couple of things about your container when you're prepping it. You want to make sure that you're leaving a little hinge location on your container just to keep the two parts together. And then you want to make sure that you're poking some drain holes in the bottom. Don't forget to label the outside of your container. All right, the last thing you want to keep in mind if you're using this winter sowing method, you're not going to have as much control over when these plants start up as you would if you were starting them indoors in your flats with grow lights. So if you're starting those seeds indoors, your seed packet may say 10 days to germination. Well, since those are in a controlled environment and these are not, it may take these seeds longer to get up and get started. So don't be concerned, don't be worried, just keep an eye on them. Now, once your seedlings get up and get going and your season starts to get warmer, you get closer to your last frost date, you may want to come to your container, cut a little slit in it to allow it to get some airflow to your seedlings. You could even pop the tape off and just vent them during the day. Otherwise, they really should not need much attention. I'm gonna set these on the east side of our shop. That way they get some good morning and midday sun. But since these are contained within these containers, I don't really want them to burn up in a hot afternoon sun if we get an unseasonably warm day. So there we go. Okay, so for this third method on starting seeds without a greenhouse is just your typical indoor sowing setup. Now, as you can see, a lot more is needed to get seeds started indoors than it does for the winter sowing or the cold frame method. But it does give me quite a bit more control over the seeds that I'm starting. There aren't as many variables to deal with when it comes to the weather. Now, starting seeds indoors does have some drawbacks that I need to account for. Again, I don't have any natural light, so some seeds are going to need light to get started. For example, I'm starting some rosemary, and those seeds are very small and they need light in order to germinate. A lot of your lettuces and things like that also need light in order to germinate and get going. Then, once these seedlings get up, we'll need lights just to allow those plants to grow. Plants need soil, light, and water. All of those things we have to consider here when we're growing indoors. Now, since we typically start all of our seeds in a greenhouse, I don't have the best setup. I've pulled some racks out of the shop that we used to keep in our greenhouse. I've got some really basic grow lights. Ideally, you would want grow lights that would hang evenly over all of your plants. But we're going to make do. I'll rotate these trays as needed to make sure that the plants are getting the light that they need. You want to buy seed trays that come with some type of dome over the top of them or some type of lid. Those type of seed trays are great for indoor sowing because we're creating a greenhouse effect to get those seeds to germinate. Again, I typically start in a greenhouse, so I don't have any seed trays of that type. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a Ziploc bag out of my kitchen. I'm going to slip it over the seed trays just to create some humidity to allow those seeds to get going. Now, grow lights aren't completely necessary when you're starting seeds indoors. If you have a really sunny room that's south facing or have a lot of windows that are south facing, you can start seeds right there in a windowsill or on a little table pushed up against that window. You just need to make sure that you're rotating those seed trays to make sure that your seedlings aren't growing towards the window. Now, when you're starting seeds in trays like this, you've got to be really mindful of the water. So this soil can dry out really quickly. So when I'm starting seeds indoors, I keep an eye on that soil moisture every single day. I also like to use seed trays that have a bottom tray connected to them. That way I can bottom water. That allows the soil to soak the water up from below instead of soaking the plants from above. So today I've just started a few things. It's pretty early for me to start some of the seeds that I need to start. These shelves are going to get pretty full up in 2 or 3 weeks when we're starting all of our tomatoes and peppers, and they weren't great candidates for the winter sowing or the cold frame method. One of those is lemon balm. It needs to be started 8 to 10 weeks before the frost, as well as rosemary. These can be a little tricky to get started. They do like heat, so I've got the heat mat under them, and they need light to germinate. So I've got a grow light over just to make sure that those seeds get germinated. I'm also starting a couple of pepper varieties. I've got a paprika and a Jimmy Nardello Italian. Once these get up and going, I will need to take these outdoors for 7 to 10 days before I transplant them out into the garden. That hardening off method is going to be necessary to make sure that these seedlings are nice and strong and don't get shocked when we put them out into the garden. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Even if you don't have a greenhouse like me this year, that you're not discouraged to get some seeds started. Growing and gardening is one of my most favorite pastimes. It's a great way for us to bring whole foods into our kitchen, get our hands dirty, get into the soil. I encourage you, get out and grow something this year. If you have more questions about these gardening methods, you can check out our blog post at House at Longmeadow. I'll post a link to that in the description below. Happy seed starting. We'll see you next time.